Pastor Shafer. I'm the senior pastor here at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California, and this is Hope Matters. Hope Matters is our weekly YouTube program during which I interview interesting people from around the community and even around the country and around the world on the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest this week is my friend Shawn Landres from Santa Monica, who is a community activist. Shawn, I think if there's anything else I would use words to describe, it would be community activist, because you're involved in so many things for good here in this community, and you've been very kind to our congregation. We'll get back to that a little bit in the past, especially around our shelter. But welcome to our program, Shawn. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Shawn, you know, I know a little bit about you personally as a family man and those kind of things and some of your community involvements, but to be honest, I thought to myself, I don't know what Shawn does for money. I know you do it. You put an awful lot of time into this.
Sure.
Is Jumpstart your financial company? Is that your job?
Well, Jumpstart is the nonprofit I co-founded about going on almost 13 years ago now.
Okay.
And we are a philanthropic research and development lab. We're a fiscal sponsor, and we have our tagline is creative social good. We work with foundations and funders. We work with individual nonprofits, community groups to ask important questions, convene conversations that we don't see happening yet in the community and think should, and push the envelope a little bit on what it means to make innovative social change and build innovative new communities and new organizations in the 21st century, because we're actually a global organization.
Cool, that's wonderful.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. We started out working mostly in the Jewish community, and we are now really truly interfaith and multi-faith and multi-group, and it's been very rewarding.
Wonderful. And I know you do a lot of things in the community. You and I serve on the Human Relations Council together and have for some years. You are the chair of the Santa Monica City Planning Commission. I'm pretty sure some of our viewers have no idea what that is and what that means.
Then they would not be alone. Well, in most cities in the United States, those cities have a top governing body, which is right. We have Congress, we have state houses, right? But then in cities you have a city council, or in counties you have a board of supervisors, and in some cities and counties. There's another elected body called the Planning Commission. In some cities and counties, those functions sit inside the city council. In Santa Monica, the Planning Commission is appointed by the city council. We are 7 residents of the city who are asked to really do 2 things. We're asked to advise the city council on land use and infrastructure. And so on a regular basis, whether it's by council request or if state law or a city ordinance says we need to be consulted, we're asked to give our opinions on what we think the law should be about land use. That's zoning, that's development standards, that's some mobility, infrastructure as well. And then in certain cases, when people who want to build things in the city would like to get permission to do that, they need to come to the Planning Commission for a permit. And in that, we act as what's called a quasi-judicial body. It means we're a little bit like a court of law. There are really strict rules about who we can talk to and about what and how we report that, so the public has confidence that we're impartial and open-minded when we look at these applications. And we also have to, this is not where we can walk in and say, oh, I don't like that project, or I love that project. We have to follow the law. We have to make specific findings based on the case before us and the law of the state and the ordinances of the city. And then we have to apply those findings to the permit before us and make an informed decision.
So if I'm a developer and want to build an apartment house, Must I go before you, or are there certain kind of standards that I don't have to bother if I'm within those standards?
Well, exactly. So it depends on what you want to do, where you want to do it, and how big you want to go. And Santa Monica recently changed its rules. While I was on the planning commission, we endorsed these changes to the city council, which has since endorsed them twice, so that it is actually much easier if you agree as a developer to follow all of Santa Monica's rules. Then when you put in an application, you should be able to get your application reviewed by staff and approved by staff, and you shouldn't have to go to the extra time and expense of waiting to be scheduled for a hearing by the planning commission. And a lot of that has to do with state law, because in recent years, the state, recognizing that we have a terrible housing crisis in California, has made it very hard for cities and planning commissions to say no to housing. You can't say no. In certain cases, you really can't say no, except for a very limited range of reasons. And so we felt that if the city's rules were clear to everybody, and we can have policy debates about what those rules should be and how they should be, what the details of those rules are. But if we can get clarity about what those rules are, and you agree to play by those rules, then we shouldn't add to the cost of housing by forcing you to hold on to it forever while you wait to get what probably will be a yes, because we are required under state law to give you that yes. And by the way, the rules are much more generous appropriately for affordable housing, for 100% affordable housing. That has become much easier to approve in Santa Monica over the last couple of years, and I'm very proud of that.
You should be, because I know, and I followed your work there. And I know we don't want to get into specifics for sure, but some of this is hard for some people to understand, isn't it? That we can't just say no to the project they don't like.
Yeah, it's true. And I'll tell you, don't tell anybody I said this, but sometimes there are projects that come in and I don't like them either. But the law is that I have to approve them because I have to make those findings. And that's why the law is the law, right? It's that we bring our thoughtfulness, we bring our expertise, we bring our experience in the community, we bring our sensitivity to the wide range of considerations that would go into a discussion like that. We look at the law and we apply it as best we can. I think one of the things that I've admired about my planning commission colleagues, and I will tell you that we don't always agree, in fact, we frequently disagree, is that each of us, and I really mean each of us, have a commitment to getting these projects to the best they can be, right? Let's get it as good as it can get. And if at the end of that process, we genuinely can't make the finding, we genuinely believe that we can't get there or we can get there, we vote our consciences, right? And that's okay, but in the process, we've each contributed to making a project better along the way, so that whatever goes forward is as good as it's going to get within the sort of framework of what we can influence and what developers are willing to do. And I have to say, Santa Monica is a city where we have some beautiful housing. I mean, we have some pretty awful housing too, but we're a city where Community Corps of Santa Monica, and I know Tara was a guest of yours not too long ago, they know that affordable housing can be beautiful and elegant and welcoming. And we have conversations with developers that come in and we say, listen, this is just too massive. Can you break up the building? Can you give it a little bit more of a step back? And because we're respectful, they're respectful too. And they make those changes. And it's a great process.
So are you the Supreme Court, or can it be appealed to somebody else if they don't?
It depends. I mean, most of the time it can be appealed to the city council, but on occasion, a handful of our decisions are final.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's a responsibility, right? Like, you don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. That's been a really major part of your community service in the last few years, hasn't it?
In the last 2 years, yes. And I also want your listeners to know that being chair is not, this is just, I'm the guy who gets to keep time and has to make sure that we go by the book. and has to make sure that all my 6 colleagues get their fair time to speak, and try to build a little bit of consensus around the virtual table. We haven't been together in nearly a year now, and it's something that we tend to switch off doing because it is a bit of an extra workload, but it is a position, and from my other work, that I'm really committed to encouraging inclusive participation in our public boards and commissions. It's one of those roles where if you get it right, you really make sure that the public gets heard, you make sure your colleagues get heard, and at the end of the day that the decisions that are made sort of on your watch, for better or for worse, they're decisions that were done thoughtfully and in a meaningful way, that builds public trust.
Yeah, we can all hope for that in many different areas.
Yeah.
So you have a unique view on this. When you look at our city, what do you see as the largest challenges in front of us in 2021?
Oh, well, I came in Santa Monica. My involvement has been through the Human Relations Council, through some other community groups. I also serve on the Financial Oversight Committee of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District, so I see those numbers. And I'm also the former chair of the Social Services Commission, which is how we first worked together when the shelter was being built, and before that, when it was being proposed. Santa Monica is a city it's a city of great contrasts. We have a census tract that qualifies as environmentally disadvantaged under state law SB 535. And it is as disadvantaged as any you would see in other parts of Los Angeles County. At the same time, we have extraordinary wealth in our community that you would not see anywhere else in Los Angeles County, except maybe in a couple of other, in a couple of zip codes east on Sunset, right? And I think because we are a city of great contrasts, we are a city, if you're asking about our greatest challenge, I think our greatest challenge is that we aren't really listening to each other. I think that's our greatest challenge. I think the recent elections in Santa Monica showed that tremendous portions of our city believed that they weren't being heard. And this is not about one side or another, because I think there are more than two sides. But I think that so many of us go into the work that we do with a sense of certainty, with an assumption that our perspective is shared by everyone who looks like us, or everyone who lives near us, or everyone with the same, roughly the same income as we have. We make these assumptions about others without actually taking the time to not just to listen for difference, but also to try to understand where that difference is coming from. And, to bring it back to housing, for example, I really believe that there are important conversations to be had about the environment, about ensuring that we build out the infrastructure that we need in order to accommodate the people who are living here and who are going to be living here in the future, that we are making it safe to move around. I hate traffic as much as the next person. I also have a recognition that I am traffic a lot of the time, right? When I'm in a car by myself, I am traffic. And so I think that it's responsible to think carefully about those questions when we talk about where and how to produce new housing, and whether there are limits to the amount of housing that a city like Santa Monica can accommodate. But by the same token, I also think that there are people who just don't want more people around. And there are people who only want to see people who look like them or think like them. And I think it helps to listen for that. And then not to take that as the final answer, but to ask why. Where is that coming from? If that comes from systemic racism, we have to do something about it. I think we all agree. We have to call people in to an honest conversation about what we do about systemic racism, from which Santa Monica has not been immune, right? But if there are real concerns underlying that, a sense of the growing income inequality, a fear of being pushed out, the number of people who live in Santa Monica on fixed incomes, who look around them, see that they can't afford to shop here anymore. They can't, it's hard to move around. They are aging and they don't feel safe crossing the street. We have to do something about that. I don't think it's fair to just reject their concerns out of hand because we're trying to move forward into a new generation. I think we actually have to listen to those concerns, honor them, try to solve them, and recognize that progress really has to be done in a way that is respectful of both past and future. I tend toward the future, but we can't do that by dishonoring the past or by ignoring real concerns, even though they may be masked in discourse or conflict or passions that feel very unpleasant at the time they're expressed.
I agree. Well, as you might imagine, in what I do, I end up saving elderly people from being pushed out by unscrupulous landlords more than I would like to admit.
Exactly. And there are more of them than anybody would like to admit.
I mean, and you know, so I've got people in long-term rent-controlled apartments that if they ever left, would not be able to live within what, 15 miles of here.
That's right.
And when my wife and I arrived here, we were given the option of the parsonage next door,
right,
or a housing allowance, but a housing allowance would have gotten us a place for a piece, as they say, from here. And
fair enough. That's right. That's right.
We were very happy to be next door. So, but here I told our viewers that I live next door. I'm not sure I wanted to do that, but anyway.
I think they know where to find you.
They do, and it's not been a problem, to be honest, Shawn, for us. And during COVID, I mean, here I am in my office, and my two assistants have been working out of their homes, but I live on the property. So
there you go.
You know, that's worked to our benefit at that point.
And you walk to work.
Yeah, and there's lots of work to be done, and we've, as you know, we've kind of doubled down on food insecurity programs here, which has been something that I've been delighted that we've been involved in, and and it just keeps getting, we just keep getting more.
And you know what? And for all of, you asked about the challenges, for all of the challenges that Santa Monica faces, for all of the listening that we don't seem to do with one another, we are an extraordinarily generous community. I mean, when you think about people turning out for the holiday pantry, when you think about the We Are Santa Monica Fund that raised $1.1 million by the end of the year, including from, presumably people who did fairly well in 2020, because we have that community here as well. That generosity is something to be celebrated and something to be appreciated and honored. And the work that you're doing is quite literally holy work. But I also think that it is human work, and it's the work that we all do in our city. So to be celebrated.
Yeah, and as you know, we've gotten nothing but support from this community for all that we've done, including the shelter. I mean, you remember, our viewers should know that Shawn was with me during all the hearings to get the shelter zoning approved and changed. And what did we have?
Before I was on the planning commission. Before I was on the planning commission.
But I mean, I think, 62 letters and only 2 against?
Yeah.
And, that was really incredible when you think about it. For this, I probably told you every so often I get stopped in the street with people saying, "Are you the pastor? Where?" And I brace myself, and they always say, "Thank you. Can I help?" I mean, it's just to a person. That's been.
And with all due respect to our neighbors to the east, I will very much say, I know it has a different name now, but I really appreciate that the Bruin Shelter came before the Trojan Shelter. We were first. I just need to make that point to your viewers.
I see. So we know where you're.
Yes. Oh, there's no question.
Well, we're looking at 2 more shelters, Shawn, not in our community, but around.
Good.
The model works, as you know, anyway. So
right.
Maybe doing.
And yet, let's name it. the fact that there have to be these shelters speaks to a broken system. It speaks to an absolutely broken system.
Sure. We have this huge success now on our pantry on the property that people can get food out of any time of the day. What a wonderful thing that the pantry is working. What a terrible thing that the pantry is working.
That's
right there. I mean, the fact that it's needed. I think we just picked up the Will Riders school feeding program here.
Oh, okay.
Because they lost funding and they lost space. Well, we're happy to help them.
Fantastic.
And I think we're feeding 23 or 25 families from that community.
Yeah.
And people are dropping food here they heard about that and they drop food here all the time. And
right. That's right. And I'm just going to put in, because this is part of my work at Jumpstart, I'm going to put in this plug, which is your viewers should also know that as part of the CARES Act, Congress passed a law that said, even if you take the standard deduction on your taxes, you can write off $300 per person per year in itemized charitable giving. So if you're going to the supermarket and you're picking up some groceries that you're going to donate, if it's under $250, you don't need to get a corresponding receipt from the nonprofit. You just keep that receipt and drop off those groceries, and you can deduct that gift from your taxes. If you're single, it's $300. If you're married or head of household, I believe it's $600. And that's a big deal. And that is going to continue into 2021. But anybody who's doing their 2020 taxes should bear that in mind. And as you're looking to 2021, it's those little things that help us help each other.
No question about that. There's no question about that. But I would also say what you well know is that the majority of people that are generous because they're generous.
Of course they are. Yes. No, I'm not suggesting otherwise, but if you're generous and some of the part of the issue is that some of the most generous people in our community are the people who have the least reserves with which to be generous. And
welcome to
right.
Rich people don't keep churches and synagogues going.
No, and I know this from the research that I've done over the last decade, right? The people who make less tend to give away a higher proportion of their income.
No question.
That's right. And so if we can get them a tax deduction, let's get them a tax deduction.
They're not looking for it. That's right.
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 I mean, we could have a conversation about, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism and which comes first, the deduction or the act of goodwill. But, that's for another podcast.
Another podcast. We could talk about Jewish and Christian attitudes toward giving. But
that's right. That's right.
But, and I'm continually surprised. One of my members came forward a few months ago. I haven't had a chance to tell you this story, and said, I want to buy a van for Joan at Food on Foot. Okay, we bought a van. I mean, we're not a big place.
Pretty cool.
We bought a $20,000 van.
That's amazing.
And we just did it.
Yeah.
And, and that gift did not hurt the congregation or that person's other giving.
Sure.
Just a gift.
No, just a gift.
And and that when you're known to be doing things, it multiplies, in a very good way, as you know. So we're just blessed to be able to do the things we can in this community. I mean, that's it's all good. Well, we've talked about a lot of things, but before we talk about more, that our theme is hope, and so you've actually alluded to some of the things that bring you hope. But what does bring you hope in your life, Shawn, and in this community?
Well, I guess I kind of want to go back to what hope is. And it's interesting to me. It's probably hard to see it. I don't know if you can see it, but the three pictures behind me are, they're a type of print that's actually fairly common in Central Europe. It's a New Year's print. So graphic artists have a tradition of making a special New Year's card, and they make 100 or 500 or however, or 50 or whatever the number is, but they're not the big prints that you would see in the museums. They're small things that they do for friends and family and subscribers. And these 3 behind me were made by a famous Slovak graphic artist called Alban Brunovsky. And from left to right, I'm going to get the years wrong, but one of them is from the mid 1960s, right around the time of the Prague Spring. The middle one is from, I believe, 1969, which was the year after the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. And the one on the to my left, to your right, is from 1973, which is during the time of deep normalization. And what I see in that progression is the artist becoming more abstract, fighting against an increasingly oppressive regime, right? So from left to right, you have it's a slightly more hopeful image, then it's a more chaotic image, and then it's almost a completely abstract image as we move to our interior. And I've always been influenced by the dissidents of that time, who were prophets, and in particular, Václav Havel, the playwright turned Czechoslovak president and Czech president, who talked about, history having been frozen and history having to get started again. And so in his book, Disturbing the Peace, which was based on a set of interviews that he did in the mid-'80s. He was in and out of prison at the time. And then this was published in English in 1990. But he says a couple of things that I think are important. He says, hope is not prognostication. It's an orientation of the spirit and orientation of the heart. He says, hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands to succeed. Skipping, it is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And he says it's this hope, this deepest and most important form of hope is what gives us the strength to live and continue to try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now. So I'm going to kind of challenge your question and say, there aren't things that give me hope. I think hope is a way of approaching all the work that we do, this kind of deep hope, right? Both of our traditions, Christian and Jewish, have a strong messianic tradition that speaks to the promised coming of a figure who will make everything better, right? The question is not that. Eschatology is not going to keep us, is not going to feed us. It is not going to shelter us. It is not going to do the things that need doing for us to be alive. The question is, what do we do between now and that great moment? And whether or not we believe, right? And whether or not we believe that when that figure arrives, whether it will be the first time that person has shown up or the second time, or the third or fourth, depending on your theology, right? The question is, do we have an obligation to do something in the meantime? My tradition says the day is short, the wages are great, the master is demanding, we are not free to desist from it is not necessary for us to complete the work, but neither are we free to desist from it. And I think that goes with what Havel is saying here. Hope is that sense. It's that way of being in the world that says we do the things we do because they make sense and because they are for the good. And we trust that if we keep doing them, eventually things will get better, whatever those things might be. And if more of us do it together, then it might get better sooner.
It's very good. And that's deep in our traditions, as you know. And
Right.
I think you and I would say it's actually deep in the traditions of most faith systems in this world.
I think so too. I think so too. And it's deep in the, I mean, this is not an Abrahamic or a revelatory religious question. I think this is true of many, many, many religious traditions and spiritual and national traditions that ask this question of what is our obligation as human beings while we are waiting and hoping and working for something else.
Yeah. Well, of course, in our civic tradition, to form a more perfect union, right?
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly. E pluribus unum is actually an aspiration. It's not, I mean, people forget it's always happening. And sometimes we lose sight of the pluribus.
That's right. Well, thank you, Shawn. This has been great. Well, thank you for talking to me today and for appearing on Hope Matters. Our guest on Hope Matters today has been Shawn Landres, a community activist and entrepreneur in the Santa Monica community, and one of my friends over time here in Santa Monica. And we're so glad that you could be with us today, Shawn. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This is Hope Matters, and where we talk to interesting people each week about the theme of hope. I'm Pastor Shafer. Thank you for joining us. Hope you will join us again next week. This is Hope Matters. We believe that hope matters. We believe we have a God of hope. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.